So we'll now move to our guest speaker, and I'm going to ask Gerd Wingler to introduce Ashley.
Yes, thank you very much, President Barry. As most of you know, I'm the Assistant District Governor, and so I'm attending some of the club meetings of my 3 clubs that I've been assigned to, and which is actually really, really great because I don't have to drive to them or anything. And maybe a couple of weeks ago or so, I heard Ashley at the Toronto East Club, and I was very impressed by this, by Ashley's talk, so that I suggested that she would be the guest speaker at our club as well. And luckily, she agreed. So just a few words about Ashley. She is an environmental defense plastics program manager. She holds a Bachelor of Science in biology and a Master's in Environment and Sustainability, both from Western University. Ashley manages Environmental Defense's campaign to end plastic pollution in Canada. So Ashley is with Environmental Defense, which is an organization that she will talk about a little bit. So to end plastics pollution in Canada. So today, Ashley is going to provide an overview, the plastic pollution problem and what Canada needs to be doing now to address the issue. And before I finish my introduction, I have something very special. I have a little video clip to send. It's only 1 minute, but that I think is very good for Ashley's introduction.
I meant with your future, your life.
Well, that's a little hard to say.
Ben.
Excuse me. Mr. McGuire.
Ben.
Mr. McGuire.
Come with me for a minute. I want to talk to you. Excuse us, Joanne.
Of course.
Thank you.
Oh, he is such a friend. I look at him and I can't believe it. I simply can't believe it.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Exactly how do you mean?
There's a great future in plastics. Think about it. Will you think about it?
Yes, I will.
Enough said. That's a deal.
It's the famous thing from The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman, is a bewildered teenager done with college or a young man anyway, and he gets this advice. And so where his friend tells him, plastics, that's the future. Plastics, one word only. So I think from Ashley, we will hear it a little different today. So welcome, Ashley, please.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Gerd, when you invited me to speak, you did mention The Graduate in the postscript. So I actually have a slide about it. I saw your message. I made some amendments to my presentation. But yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see my slides. Thanks for having me today. My name is Ashley Wallis, and as Gerd said, I lead Environmental Defense's work in the campaign to end plastic pollution. So Environmental Defense is a national environmental charity. We've been around for about 30 years. And if you're not familiar with us, Environmental Defense is a leading advocacy organization. And we work with government, industry, and individuals to defend clean water, a safe climate, and healthy communities. And this is my slide with the quote from the movie, just one word, plastics. So from that point onward, we have seen a great proliferation of plastic, obviously with some benefits, but with a lot of downsides as well. So we've all seen images from around the world of massive piles of plastic, often in landfills or along shorelines. And I'm sure many of us have also seen photographs or read articles about whales with bellies full of plastic, or maybe you've seen that disturbing video of a turtle with a straw stuck in its nose. Plastic harms and kills wildlife. It strangles them. They end up entangled in it, sometimes drowning. They ingest plastic. They suffocate in plastic. And in Canada alone, about 29,000 tons of plastic waste end up in the environment every year. Currently, Canada only recycles about 9% of its plastic waste. 86% ends up in landfills, 4% is incinerated, and the rest ends up in the environment. And one of the biggest contributors to all of this waste is single-use plastic. About 40% of plastic waste is single-use items. This is mostly packaging, items that are used for less than 6 months, but will remain in the environment or the landfill for decades, centuries, if not millennia. Now, there has been some progress made to eliminate plastic waste. In 2019, the federal government announced plans to ban certain harmful or hard-to-recycle single-use plastics. Some provinces have also introduced legislation to ban single-use plastic bags. In Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, they both instituted plastic bag bans last year. We've seen some movement in industry. Sobeys, for example, has voluntarily removed plastic bags from its stores and moved towards paper. Some beverage producers like Coca-Cola and Nestle have made commitments to minimum recycled content targets in their packaging. And companies like Unilever, P&G, and Nestle are also exploring reuse packaging to get their products to customers. But unfortunately, some of the progress we've made we're seeing being threatened as a result of COVID. So I'm sure many folks in recent days, if they've gone to a grocery store, might have been told they can't use their reusable bags or are being encouraged to use disposable bags. In the U.S., we've seen the plastic industry lobby hard to remove existing bans or to block bans on plastic goods that were coming down the pipe. In the EU, we saw something similar. So the plastics industry lobby was pushing the European Commission to delay action and rollout of their single-use plastics directive. Thankfully, the European Commission did not sway to the industry's efforts, and they're moving full force ahead with their plans to reduce single-use plastics. But in England, a ban on straws, stirrers, and cotton swabs has been delayed indefinitely. And this is particularly unfortunate because there's actually no evidence to show that single-use plastics are safer, especially than clean reusables. New research has shown actually that the coronavirus can live on a variety of surfaces, including plastic. It actually lives longer on plastic than cloth or cardboard. And really the most important thing is to be practicing good hygiene and cleaning more so than going all in on disposable items. The truth is that plastic pollution was a massive problem before the pandemic. It's still one now, and it will continue to be an issue after the pandemic unless we take action. So I'm going to introduce you guys a little bit to a new maybe a new idea, a different kind of economy. So this is a diagram here of our current economy, the linear economy. So you can see we take oil, we make goods, we use them, and then we throw them away when we're done with them, either into the landfill, through burning and incineration, or into the environment. It's actually estimated that Canadians throw away about $7.8 billion worth of plastic every year. If we compare this to what could be, so a circular economy, in this system, instead of disposing of plastic waste in the landfill or an incinerator, we capture it at its end of life and use it to manufacture other high-value goods. So in this system, we are essentially eliminating our reliance on virgin fossil fuels, and we're also eliminating waste. But I want to go a little bit deeper with you guys. So this is a more complex diagram of the same thing put together by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And for our purposes, we're going to specifically look at this side. So this is the side that's looking at technical nutrients. Plastic would be considered a technical nutrient in comparison to biological nutrients like plant material, food waste, etc. So if you kind of follow the pathway to manufacturing, you can see that materials are mined. They're used to manufacture parts. Those parts are put into a product. That product is given to a service provider, and eventually that product ends up with a user. In the circular economy, as much as possible, we're trying to keep that product in use for as long as possible in its current form. So the first thing we want to do is encourage users to maintain something for as long as possible so they don't need to replace it. When that's no longer possible or they no longer need that item, we reuse or redistribute that material. So this is particularly common if you think about things. I have a young child, we have a lot of plastic toys, you only need them for a very brief period of time. After we've taken really great care of them, they can be reused or redistributed to other folks who need them. And then the next kind of circle is refurbishment. So if there's damage to a product, we want to make sure that it's easy to repair and then put back into the economy. And then when all of those options are exhausted, we're looking at recycling. And the reason this is so important to consider is because often what we do in our current system is we jump right to recycling. You have a product, you're no longer using it, and now, well, hopefully we can recycle it, and if not, we'll landfill it. And there's a lot of inefficiencies in that model. And further to that, the truth is we cannot recycle our way out of the current situation that we're in. We have too much plastic in the system, and it is too complex for us to rely on recycling alone. And sure, there are innovations coming down the pipe, which hopefully will allow us to deal with more complex plastic materials, but recycling really does need to be the last-ditch effort to recapture something's value, not our first and often only attempt to keep something out of the landfill or incinerator. So how do we get there? In March of this year, Environmental Defense released this report where we outlined 6 ways government can get Canada on track to zero plastic waste by 2025. And so I'm going to go through some of the, well, all 6 of those things that we lay out in pretty high level detail, but I encourage you to check out our report if you want to learn more. So number 1, collect better data. There's actually very little reliable information about the types, amounts, and uses of plastics that are produced, imported, and disposed of in Canada. We rely a lot on surveys, but not actual data collection. And this is particularly problematic when you have the Canadian government making commitments to zero plastic waste. How will you measure the accomplishment of that goal if you don't have a thorough understanding of where we're coming from? And so we think at an absolute minimum, the Canadian government needs to put in place a framework to get a fulsome understanding of all of the plastics on the market and where they're ending up. Number 2, ban single-use plastics. So this is something that gets a lot of attention in the media, and it was a commitment that the federal government made last year that they were going to ban some single-use plastic items. This is really important for a couple of reasons. One, there are totally plastic items out there that there are alternatives to, or that no matter what we do are never going to be efficiently recycled or reused, and so those materials as much as possible should be banned. It's also important because it signals that we acknowledge our current consumption systems when it comes to plastic are unsustainable, and signals a transition away from single-use disposability towards better systems like reuse. Which brings me to deposit return systems. So Canada also needs to expand and consolidate the use of deposit return programs. Deposit systems increase collection and recycling rates. They also increase the quality of recycled material because you're often only collecting a very specific kind of material through a deposit system. But perhaps most importantly, they actually can enable reuse. So a lot of plastic packaging in Canada could technically be refilled and reused, but it's currently not. If we look at a country like Germany, they have a deposit system for beverage containers, and their plastic bottles are actually sterilized and refilled 20 to 25 times before they're recycled. So coming back to that diagram I showed you earlier of the loops, that keeps you in that kind of closer to the user loop a lot longer before you're spinning out to recycling, and we need to see more of that. We also need to see support for a shift towards other reuse systems. So a lot of us, I think, when we think about reuse, we think about bring your own container programs, like where you bring your own reusable coffee cup to a cafe, or your own reusable bags to a grocery store. I know some of the restaurants in my neighborhood were starting to encourage folks to bring their own reusable containers instead of taking styrofoam takeaway containers to take their food to go. But there are actually systems in place that exist that just need broader adoption. So an example in Canada is related to a task. You can see the cup up there in the top corner of the screen. So this is an initiative that is particularly popular in Quebec. If you are a cafe, you can opt into the La Tasse program, and if as a consumer you visit that cafe and you want to take your coffee to go, you pay a $5 deposit to get the La Tasse cup. You go, you enjoy your coffee, and then when you're done with it, you can either return the cup to the cafe where you initially purchased your coffee to get your money back, or any other participating cafe, or you can get another coffee and they'll give you a fresh cup, and you can just do that until you're ready to get your deposit back. On the bottom of the screen, you can see some examples of an initiative called Loop. This is a program that was started by TerraCycle, which is a waste management company in the U.S. in partnership with Unilever, P&G, and some other folks. So it's currently being piloted in some places in the U.S. and Europe, not in Canada yet, but the idea is that you could get some of your favorite products in reusable containers, and they would be shipped directly to your house, and you would be on a regular refill kind of system, and then once you're out, new products would be sent to you in reusable containers, and you would send your reusable containers back. They would be sterilized and refilled. So this is a way to eliminate that single-use packaging once again. We also know that economic incentives are really great at discouraging customers or consumers from using single-use packaging. Loblaw, before it instituted its 5-cent fee for plastic bags, did a study to determine whether it was better to give a discount to consumers or to charge a fee for the bags. They found that giving a discount essentially changed nothing, but charging even 5 cents per bag reduced plastic bag use by 55%. So there's an opportunity to further expand those kinds of programs beyond plastic bags and maybe also make them mandatory instead of just having a few businesses deciding to run them on their own. And finally, setting recycled content targets. So this one is really important. Unfortunately, in our current system, the economics don't actually favor using recycled material in the production of new packaging. That's because we have a large supply of subsidized fossil fuels. Also, recently, if any of you guys have been following oil prices, they have dipped very, very low. And so for most businesses, it's actually cheaper for them to buy virgin material than it is for them to use recycled resin. And if government doesn't require the use of recycled content in packaging, it's unlikely that we will see that material actually being used in efficient ways. And so up until very recently, we actually sent a lot of our recyclables to China. We still send a ton of our recyclables overseas. And that's because we just didn't have the system, the markets in place to be able to use the material, and other countries did. But the downside to that is when we send our waste to other countries, they often do not have the infrastructure in place to manage the poor quality materials we're sending. And those materials, our materials from Canada, end up in the environment. Or even worse, are burned in open fields, releasing tons of toxic chemicals into the environment, the soil, and the water. So that was kind of a broad overview of some of the ideas in our report and some of the work that we're doing. I encourage you to check out our report if you want to learn more. It's environmentaldefense.ca/no-time-to-waste. We also have a petition targeting Minister Wilkinson, who is the Environment and Climate Change Canada Minister, asking him to still take action on plastics. If you feel passionate, definitely check that out. And obviously, if you guys have any questions, I am here, or you can send me an email at the email below.
Thanks, Ashley. Anybody does have questions, just raise your hand, and Ashley, you could answer them.
See a few hands.
Danny, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Actually, I was in New Zealand this year, and we did not get a single piece of plastic as far as when we bought anything. It was always in a brown paper bag. Is that has that government that has done that in New Zealand?
The government has been moving on some plastic actions in New Zealand. I can't tell you for sure if they have outright banned plastic or if it's been more of like an organic voluntary measure. I know that they're on the verge of instituting a deposit return program, and in terms of their response to COVID, they have been obviously opening a lot more quickly than we have, and their framework has definitely been one that allows reuse. They've encouraged cafes to continue to use reusable containers, but just to do a certain practice to make sure that contamination or exposure rates are very low or non-existent. So they are very progressive, but I'm just not quite sure about whether that's regulated or it's voluntary.
Yeah, would you say, if I go into, say, Tim Hortons and I look inside the recycle bin, it's garbage in every bin, right? So it must be really important to educate people on recycling. You don't really get a lot of that education on recycling, because obviously people, they really don't bother, and I'm pretty sure that the people in Tim Hortons, they just throw the whole thing in the garbage.
Yeah, so, okay, I guess a couple things about that. First off, businesses in Ontario do not fall under the same piece of legislation as residential collection, and so some businesses, basically businesses have to have their own independent waste management company for the most part, and some waste management companies actually do ask that you just mix everything together, and they have like a back-end place where they have staff and equipment that does the sorting instead. And so I used to work for another environmental organization, and I know that the waste management company we went with was one of those companies. And so it was really difficult to message, because people wanted to obviously sort, but our waste management provider was like, there's really no point, because we sort everything once we get the material. I'm not telling you that that is who Tim Hortons uses, and I suspect that they don't, because I know that we paid a premium for that service as an environmental organization, and it was important to us. But it is possible. I'm really hesitant to put too much onus on the individual to sort properly. Our recycling system is incredibly complex, and the rules are different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So if you are in Hamilton, some stuff can be recycled. If you're in Toronto, different stuff can be recycled. If you're in Halifax, different stuff is recycled. So it's really hard as a consumer to know what goes where. And then the other thing I'll say is that a lot of the stuff that you're getting from Tim Hortons is actually not recyclable, period. Things like coffee cups are not recyclable. They have a plastic lining on the inside that makes them very expensive and challenging to recycle, and so they usually are just landfilled. And a lot of their other paper packaging is also coated with various plastic resins. So upsetting to see, but truthfully probably most of that stuff is garbage anyway. And that's one of the reasons we've also been advocating for Canada to move towards a system called extended producer responsibility, and that's a system where producers are actually the ones who are financially and operationally responsible for collecting and recycling their waste. And that's really important, because right now, essentially, producers can make whatever, and municipalities are the ones, or businesses like Tim Hortons are the ones who actually have to pay for the systems to collect and recycle it. And so there's a huge disconnect. If you, as a producer, are putting something on the market that is hard or expensive to recycle, you don't actually have to be faced with those consequences, economic or otherwise. And so an extended producer responsibility would kind of put that onus where it belongs, on the folks who are actually manufacturing these products and packaging materials in the first place.
Thank you.
No problem.
Other questions? Gerd has a question.
Yes. Ashley, do you have a dog?
I do. I'm sorry.
Can you imagine where this question is going to go to?
Is it have to do with poop?
Exactly. What are you going to do with the poop if you have no plastic bags?
Yeah, so, I will tell you that I have been in pickles before where my dog has taken an unexpected second poop on a walk, and I've gotten very creative with large maple leaves I have found on the ground to pick up that waste and dispose of it correctly.
But, I'm not really talking about dog poop, but there are really useful things that we use plastic bags and stuff like that, that it's very difficult to really kind of think about without. And this plastic bag thing is just the way it is. We often use plastic bags to carry stuff, or, the dog food, whatever, and
if they all go away, wow, that's a bit of a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, there are definitely alternatives when it comes to kind of carrying plastic bags, just to generally carry stuff in plastic bags. There are reusable bags. There are alternatives. I know I have one of those like tiny little collapsible reusable bags that I always have in my bag, so even if I unexpectedly stop in somewhere to pick something up, I have something to carry it home in. This is actually the way many of our grandparents lived for a very long time. When I talked to my grandmother, she's like, oh yeah, I can remember when plastics came around. Like, but up until then, we always took our own containers. We always had our own plastic, like our own tote bags and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think there probably is going to still be some plastic in the environment. It's just, or not in the environment, but that we are using. But we are using an excess of it right now in ways that we don't need to use it. And for example, Environmental Defense has been really clear about how we don't think that we need to be, at this time, seriously focusing on reducing or eliminating plastics that are used in the medical or pharmaceutical sector. Those are plastics that we do consider to be essential. But there are lots of plastics that we use there are alternatives for, and there really is no point in continuing to use plastic in that situation.
Okay, and we can field questions from guests too, so don't feel that you can't ask questions. But I saw Anthony's hand up.
Oh, man.
Anthony, you have to unmute yourself.
I think Corey had his hand up before I did.
Okay, Courtney's going to be.
Okay,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. Ashley, thank you so much for the presentation. Really, really excellent. I take note that of the 6 strategies that you identified, and the producer paying for recycling and collection did not make that 6. And so when you first said you were going to highlight 6 strategies, my brain quickly said, well, for sure we're going to hold these corporations somehow responsible. And so, you didn't include that one, so maybe you could give us a little understanding as to why that didn't make the 6. And just a second question, what are the Swedes doing on this?
So the first thing I'll say is that's more of an oversight of my presentation than it is of our position. We released a foundational report about 2.5 years ago that focused heavily on extended producer responsibility, and that's kind of been like the cornerstone of our campaign. The most recent work we've been doing has been more about additional regulatory or policy frameworks to support that, and so I just kind of ended up pulling mostly from the current report because we're trying to promote it, but not necessarily because any of that stuff is more important than EPR. I think extended producer responsibility is definitely absolutely essential. And in Ontario, we're getting pretty close to maybe having an extended producer responsibility system, and Environmental Defense is engaged in that process, both as a stakeholder and also through our supporters and kind of advocacy work. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Basically, EPR is incredibly important. In terms of what the Swedes are doing, I don't really know if I can answer that. I'm not really an expert on the waste policy in other jurisdictions. I have a good idea of kind of highlights of what's happening in the European Union and in other kind of key countries, but I don't know if I can really. Is there something you've heard about that's happening in Sweden that you were curious to get my insights on?
Not really, but I know in terms of a lot of policies, they tend to be a bit ahead of others. So Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Danny had raised New Zealand, so I just know that in a lot of these kind of policies, they tend to be quite often ahead of others. Maybe not so on the COVID thing with Sweden, but certainly with a lot of other things.
Yeah, I will say that extended producer responsibility has actually been in Europe for a long time. About 20 years, most of the countries have had some form of extended producer responsibility, and it hasn't necessarily worked out to be like the silver bullet that they were hoping for when it comes to waste. And I think that that is in part because they've really just pushed extended producer responsibility without some of the other complementary measures we were talking about. Specifically, the recycled content piece has turned out to be incredibly important, because if you don't have a market for the material that you are collecting and turning into recycled resin, then you're not really recycling. You might be collecting all of this material, but it doesn't have anywhere to go. Which I guess brings me to another downside to some of what we see in Europe, is that they have invested heavily in incineration as a method of managing their waste. So a lot of energy from waste facilities where you are burning plastics and other materials to generate steam, to move a turbine, to create electricity. And you know, I think a lot of people hang on to this idea. It's like, that actually sounds really great. We could get rid of all plastic. We could generate energy, like win-win-win. But there are some serious downsides to incineration energy from waste. One of those being that these facilities are very expensive to build. It usually takes anywhere from 20 to 40 years to pay off like all of the infrastructure investment in terms of the energy generated, which means you're basically building a huge beast that you need to feed with waste. And that makes it harder to justify a movement towards a circular economy, because now you actually need waste, which just encourages more of a production of material to go into the incinerator. So there's some lessons that we've learned from Europe, actually, that are telling us we might not want to go exactly the route of some of the typical leaders when it comes to environmental action.
Thank you.
Okay, Anthony, did you want to ask a question?
Hi, actually. So with the goal in mind to be zero plastic in 2020, what type of materials are companies coming up with that can be manufactured without negatively impacting the environment?
Mm-hmm. So just to clarify, I guess, our goal is to be zero plastic waste by 2025. So there would be a combination of reducing overall plastic use, but also better managing plastics that are on the market. So part of that could also mean changing from more complicated plastics, which might have multiple layers, to plastics that are more easily recyclable. So, for example, a lot of us see like stand-up freezer pouches you might get like frozen fruit or vegetables in. They have like a little Ziploc kind of top thing. That has like 3 different kinds of plastic in it, which makes it incredibly challenging to recycle. So basically that material is discarded. But the hope is that with extended producer responsibility, producers might be incentivized to change that packaging so that it is actually more easily recycled. Or, as I mentioned, we would see producers move towards reusable packaging, like the loop system or Latas or something like that. But I also do think there is a place for some materials that are different from plastic that are still single-use. In general, I think single-use as a concept is something we should be moving away from, and we should be looking at things that can be used more than once. Things like the usual paper. There's some interesting stuff happening with mushrooms. Like there's a new kind of packaging you can put in, like if you're delivering an electrical, sorry, I'm trying to think of the word. Basically, usually if you get a package with a piece of electronics in it, it comes wrapped in styrofoam. So there's stuff they're doing now with mushrooms where mycelium, which is like the roots of the mushroom, create an alternative to styrofoam. And it's completely biodegradable. It's essentially edible. You can put it in your garden. So that would be an alternative to styrofoam moving forward.
Okay, we have one more question. Dave Shamunko?
Actually, that's a really interesting presentation. One of the things that I'm single, and I find that because of all this multi-use stuff, or I try to multi-use, but things like I get vitamins. They come in a plastic container. They've got some sort of stuff in it. They come in a box, which is a combination of plastic and cardboard. And at the end of the day, you end up with a ton of waste that really is a waste. There's nothing to do with it. And how have you guys been trying to change the policy on that? I mean, I would love to buy things in one container, and maybe go back and have it refilled. How are we going to move to that sort of an economy? You're proposing 2025. I don't see it though. So I can cynical about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so there's an idea of imposing taxes on businesses that have like single use, or imposing taxes based on the amount of, or fees based on the amount of packaging that a producer puts forward. In the situation of your like vitamin guy, if your vitamin person is putting together this packaging, and they know at the end of the day that they're going to be the ones that have to pay for the collection and the recycling of all of the materials in their packaging, they might be incentivized to create a simpler packaging that doesn't have as many pieces that they don't have to pay for. But I think you also are highlighting an interesting point, which is that as an individual consumer, it's incredibly hard, if not impossible, to truly live a zero-waste lifestyle, and that's why environmental defense advocates for more systems-level change, especially as it relates to this issue. Obviously, I work in this space. I showed you guys like my reusable container. But I think another huge issue that we face is that right now, a lot of zero-waste stuff is or other products that people have to pay for that are often more expensive and are not easily accessible to everybody in our communities, which has kind of pushed this like zero waste thing to be something that people aspire to who tend to be more wealthy. And we really need to level the playing field. There's places in my neighborhood where you can go and have a grocery experience without packaging. They have everything kind of like free on the shelves, and you bring your own containers or you purchase containers from them, but their prices are more expensive. And so until we have the systems in place that make this more of the rule as opposed to the exception, I think it's going to continue to be fringe and really only accessible to richer people, and that's not cool. So that's really why we do need to see the systems change and the regulations in place.
Actually, certainly a presentation that affects us all. Very interesting. I'm sure we could go on forever asking questions because we just want to know how are we going to solve this. But I'm going to call on Basil Diaz to formally thank you as our speaker.
This has been a wonderful presentation and very timely. We think and see pictures of plastic bottles on the bottom of the ocean, but it's so deep down that we think it doesn't affect us and it doesn't affect anything in our future. I think this message is something that we have to get out. I know that COVID-19 has set back the recycling and the elimination of plastics, and hopefully we can get over COVID-19 and move over to looking after our environment. Rotary has always been conscious of the environment. When I joined our club, we started planting trees, and now we're thinking of our world and the world outside of our little area, and, you know, shipping plastics to other countries and letting them deal with containers of contaminated waste is not cool. We know that there are alternatives. When we get rid of our waste at home, we can use compostable bags instead of plastic bags. We know when we have our rib fest, we can have compostable cups instead of plastic cups. There are alternatives. I was surprised when we went to Berlin to see the recycling of water bottles. You pay a deposit, you take your bottle back, you get your deposit, you get new bottles. This is really timely, and we thank you very, very much, and hopefully we can help you get your message out to the population at large. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.